If you value deep historical analysis and practical knowledge that still works under pressure today, subscribe to YT The Global War Archive now and, well, share this channel with others who take history seriously. What we are covering here is not trivia and it is not nostalgia. It is a proven cognitive technology refined in the medieval world, tested in monasteries, universities and courts, and still capable of outperforming modern note-taking when used correctly. If you stay with me for the next few minutes, you will walk away with techniques that medieval scholars used to memorize entire libraries and that survivalists can still apply when information access collapses. For centuries before printing, medieval scholars faced a problem modern people rarely consider. Knowledge could not be Googled, copied, or casually referenced. If you wanted information, you carried it in your head or you lost it. Out of this necessity emerged memory palaces and structured retention systems that were not mystical tricks, but disciplined mental architectures. These systems gave medieval thinkers a cognitive advantage that modern audiences often underestimate, and honestly, understanding them reveals how historical elites trained their minds for endurance, precision, and long-term recall. The origins of the medieval memory palace begin in classical antiquity, but the Middle Ages perfected it under pressure. The method of loci, commonly called the memory palace, was attributed to figures like Cicero and later preserved and expanded by medieval monks. The core principle was simple but demanding. Information was anchored to stable, familiar spatial environments such as cloisters, cathedrals, or estates. Each location served as a cognitive hook, allowing complex material to be retrieved in precise sequence without written aids. Medieval scholars did not treat memory as passive storage. Memory was a moral and intellectual discipline. In monastic settings, retention was tied to spiritual obedience and intellectual rigor. To forget was to fail in duty. This is why memory training was systematic rather than casual. A monk memorizing scripture would assign verses to specific architectural features of a known building, walking through that space mentally during recitation. The physicality of stone walls and corridors reinforced cognitive stability, reducing memory decay over time. The real advantage of medieval memory palaces was not just recall, but organization. Information was not stored randomly. It was structured hierarchically. Theology occupied the highest symbolic spaces, practical knowledge the lower ones. This hierarchy mattered because it allowed scholars to retrieve not just facts, but relationships between ideas. When a medieval thinker debated doctrine or law, they were mentally walking through a structured archive rather than recalling isolated data points. Applying this today requires rejecting modern habits of shallow storage. To build a functional memory palace, the first step is selecting a real, deeply familiar location. This could be your childhood home, a workshop, or a frequently traveled route. The location must be stable in memory. A medieval scholar would never choose an abstract space. Once selected, the space is divided into fixed stations. Each station holds a single concept, not a paragraph. This discipline prevents cognitive overload and mirrors medieval practice. For example, if you're studying medieval warfare logistics, one station might hold supply chain principles, another fortification types, and another seasonal campaign constraints. Each concept is encoded as a vivid but controlled image tied to the location. Medieval thinkers avoided randomness. Images were symbolic, exaggerated only enough to remain distinct. Blood, fire, or scale were used deliberately, not theatrically. Survivalists can apply this under conditions where writing is impossible or dangerous. A memory palace can store evacuation routes, medicinal knowledge, tool repair procedures, or historical case studies of societal collapse. One practical method is to rehearse retrieval under mild stress, walking the palace mentally while performing physical activity. Medieval scholars understood that memory must survive distraction, fatigue, and fear, not just quiet study. Beyond memory palaces, medieval retention relied on repetition with variation. Texts were revisited in different contexts, not reread passively. A concept memorized during prayer was later recalled during debate or instruction. This forced memory to adapt to multiple retrieval cues, strengthening long-term retention. Modern learners can replicate this by recalling information while walking, speaking aloud, or explaining it to others without notes. Figures such as Thomas Aquinas exemplified this discipline. His ability to synthesize vast theological systems was not accidental. It was the product of structured memory training that allowed rapid access to layered arguments. When reading Aquinas, you are not just seeing thought, but the architecture of a trained memory at work. The enduring lesson here is that medieval memory techniques were not hacks. They were systems built for permanence. They assumed scarcity, instability, and high cognitive stakes. In an era where information overload weakens retention, returning to these methods offers a competitive intellectual advantage. This is not about romanticizing the past. It is about reclaiming tools that were forged under harsher conditions than most modern minds ever face. If this guide added value to your understanding of history as applied knowledge rather than passive consumption, subscribe to YT the Global War Archive, share this video with serious historians and preparedness-minded thinkers, and keep these techniques alive by using them. Knowledge that is not retained is knowledge already lost.